the Democratic Party has become the party of the elites. It used to be the party of the poor and the working class. In fact, there was a study that came out just recently that I saw that showed that 70%, that the people who voted for Biden own 70% of the wealth in this country. The people who voted for Trump own 30%. And so
I believe that.
Right. So you're seeing this realignment happen where the elites, where Wall Street, where the big tech, big pharma, the big banking houses are all now Democratic. And that the working class, the middle class, the cops, the firefighters, Sean O'Brien, the head of the Teamsters Union, spoke.
Good guy.
A great guy, great guy. Really love him, but he spoke at the Democratic convention. The Republican convention rather than Democratic convention. So you're seeing this big alignment, and even on environmental issues. It's so weird to me because the Democrats have become subsumed in this carbon orthodoxy, and you and I have talked about this, that the only issue is carbon. And what that's done is it's forced them to do something that you should never do if you're an environmentalist, which is to commoditize and quantify everything. So everything is measured by its carbon footprint, how many tons of carbon it produces. And, you're basically, you're putting everything in that kind of box of being able to quantify it and explain its value by numerically. And the reason that we protect the environment is just the opposite of that. The reason that we protect the environment is because there's a spiritual connection. There's a love that we have. I got into the environment because I wanted, this connection to the fishes and the birds and the wildlife and the whales and the Purple Mountain's majesty. And that, I understood that the way, God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great prophets, through the wise people, the great books of those religions, but nowhere with the kind of detail and texture and grace and joy as through creation. And when we destroy nature, we diminish our capacity to sense the divine, to understand who God is and what our own potential is and duties are as human beings. And that...
I hope what you just said, by the way, is chopped up and put all over every social media platform in the world. When we destroy nature, we degrade our own ability to experience the divine.
Hey, good evening. Whoa, that's cool. Look at that. How about that? All right. Good evening. It is Thursday, July 3rd, 2025, episode 41 of The Whiners, and it's the eve of Independence Day. And so I'm going to wish you happy Independence Day Eve. I'm going to introduce our first guest here in a second, Rob Lucero, who is running for Democrat for Congress in Los Angeles County as a Kennedy Democrat. And I do mean Bobby Kennedy Jr., but I think Rob's going to tell us he also means JFK. So welcome. Now, before we talk politics, what are people drinking tonight?
I'm drinking a big, beautiful bottle of Red Apothic, the original blend. $11 average throughout the nation on this big, beautiful broadcast.
Big, beautiful. Yes.
Getting a theme here.
Yeah,
Hakeem
absolutely.
Jeffries is right now in his 5th hour talking about how wonderful we are. Just keep going, Hakeem. Keep going. Can never get too much praise. What are you
What's
guys
he
drinking?
blending?
Well, how about you, Morgan? I mean, you're quick.
I
You'll
know.
tell us.
I keep it very simple. It's just water tonight. Got work in the morning, so I
Water into wine is the
yes.
theme for you. So, well,
Is
I
it
know.
fancy? Is it alkaline infused?
No, it's just normal supermarket water.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I'm drinking here. I'm drinking Textbook, and I got this beautiful little picture of books and the wine.
Fancy.
And it's pretty yummy. It's about $20. And I actually had it yesterday. I had to taste it early, and Jeff, I kept it by my bedside with the bottle open, and it tastes better today. I don't know, proximity had anything to do with it being near me, and it's just better. But how about you, Rob? You had a story about the wine.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have a nice picture like the one that you have, but for the folks at home, this is San Simeon. Where my camera is.
Yeah.
It's Paso Robles. It's a Syrah 2020, but it's from the San Antonio Winery, which is a famous winery here in Los Angeles. Apparently, around the turn of
Downtown,
the
just
century.
east of downtown. Am I right?
Yeah, there were like 90 wineries here about 120 years ago. They went out of business. Prohibition hit, and one of the wine that got the winery that got the sweetheart deal with the Catholic Church to stay open was the San Antonio Winery. And so they have remained open. They invested well in the 50s and 60s into Monterey, Napa, and the Central Coast. So this is one of their Central Coast wines. So that's one thing, that this winery is in my district that I'm running in. And the winery is also within 1 or 2 blocks of where my grandfather was born, on North Main Street in Los Angeles in 1931. So the winery was 2 years old and he was born.
Wow.
So yeah, it means a lot to our family, that area in what's called Lincoln Heights, just north of the LA River, what we call the LA River.
Cool. Now, there you are, working with Bobby Kennedy. You were a director for the campaign, and now you're running. I mean, I know Jeff has some burning questions, and let me just tell our audience before we go on. After Rob actually tells us about his campaign, we are going to go into some of the interesting things on the debate on NATO that is being discussed with the war dangers. So feel free to stick around, Rob, for that. But what Kennedy are you branded as a Democrat?
Well, that's the thing is when I was first talking to some Democrats locally about running for office, they said, well, the first thing you got to do is apologize for working with Bobby Kennedy. No one's going to understand how you did that, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, I'm not going to do that. That's number one. I came to Bobby Jr. I get to say that the same man that introduced his father to Cesar Chavez in 1964 was the same man that introduced me to Bobby Jr. in 2018. And that was a labor leader named Paul Schrade, who was actually standing behind Bobby Sr. as they walked into the pantry, and he was probably shot first when the shots rang out, and Bobby Sr. was assassinated. So Paul was a UAW labor leader. He'd been sent out to California in the 60s to help these newly organizing farm workers, and met this brilliant young man named Cesar Chavez. And at one point he told Bobby Sr., look, you got to come out here and meet this guy. You got to see these people. You got to meet this guy. So if you've ever heard about the senator from New York coming out to California and on the flight saying, why am I going to California? He says, well, yeah, Paul got me to do this. So Paul was very close to Bobby, to Ethel after Bobby's assassination, and to the Kennedy family till the day he died, which was only about 3 years ago. So I got to know Paul. So the key point here is I was introduced to Bobby from a completely different track than what he's become known for around, the vaccines and MAHA and such. But I have pretty much been obsessed with not the Kennedys, but the direction the country was in 1963 when John was killed, and then Lee Harvey Oswald was killed within a day or two of that assassination. And Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were killed. So I just think that there's a lot going back to that the potential that was there in the 1960s that we just haven't realized. as Americans.
But is
So
the
that's why
Democratic Party
so-
still the best vector to achieve that goal? You are a Kennedy Democrat, but the
Mhm.
new Kennedy, who's most prominent now, left the Democrat Party. That
Mhm.
must have been something that you at least considered.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about why you've decided to run as a Democrat as opposed to, well,
Yeah.
anything else?
Sure. Well, like Bobby, I believe the Democratic Party left me and left a lot of Americans more than my leaving it. So, June of 2015, 10 years ago, was when Trump came down the escalator and announced his campaign for president. And 15 other Republicans couldn't even get close to challenging him for the nomination. And the same year in 2016, Bernie Sanders almost stole the election from the DNC. Well, organized it, right? I mean, that was really the year of the independents because, truth be told, Trump is really an independent who took over a dying Republican Party, right? In my
That's
view,
fair,
at
yeah.
least. So, I went through in 2022. I ran in the Democratic Party the early part of the campaign against Alex Padilla for U.S. Senate here in California. And I
Wait,
was
Jose
told by the
Padilla?
Democrats- Yeah, also known as Jose, a famous stunt man here in California. But that's how we do in Hollywood, ugly Hollywood, as they call DC. But yeah, so I ran against Padilla, but the Democratic Party said we're not going to have any other voices. So talking to the Republican Party, they said you're welcome to come in here. They were going to run me statewide for Secretary of State. I hadn't been a Republican long enough to to run in their election, but there's been a lot of shuffling here because the truth is, as your intro said, the Democratic Party now represents more of Wall Street and the war machine than the Republican Party does now, or at least it's debatable. So I'm hoping that in this election, look, in my election, last thing I'll say about this, the Democratic Socialists are taking over some major positions in the United States. They have 2 city council seats already. Actually, I think it's like 3 or 4 in LA. They're about to win the mayor's race in New York City. They won the Democratic nomination. So the DNC and the DSA are battling it out, and I'm actually left being what I consider to be a sort of traditional common sense Democrat. One of the things that sets me apart is I'm for real industrial development, infrastructure development, major infrastructure projects, and science. I see nothing like that coming from either the DNC or the DSA.
Yeah, of course. Of course not.
Yeah.
I will say kudos to you for, getting that alert to be, apologetic for your connection with Kennedy, and you double down and you put the name even on your website.
Yeah.
And I also enjoyed, looking at your website. You speak on the connection between, issues abroad to local issues and how it really interconnects. So I just wanted to, say kudos to that. I thought that was very interesting. And I guess I want to ask, for me in North Carolina, the Kennedy campaign, the assault that happened, it didn't resonate with people. I went to a rally, I believe it was after October 7th. So I really kind of wanted to pose the question about where he stood on this issue, knowing where he stood, but to kind of hold his feet to the fire. But he was the only candidate that I saw that was talking about like the big 3 corporations that own everything. And kind of the real issues, or how these houses are being gobbled up by these, big banks. No other candidate was talking about it. So it didn't really resonate with North Carolinians, these scare tactics. But did it resonate with, I guess, with California, or was it already there?
You mean the attempts to sort of paint him as a crazy, etc.?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and it varied. I mean, there were actually places where, well, first of all, I'll take a step back and say that I firmly believe that Bobby joining Trump was a huge reason that Trump won in 2024. Maybe not the only reason, but the people that Bobby was mobilizing, for example, people your age, your generation, really responded to his message and what he was saying. And he was one of the first people I ever saw from his generation, the boomer generation, who said, look, I'm a boomer. And the biggest problem is my generation watches cable news. They don't know that you guys don't watch that stuff and don't believe anything they say on that. My generation's just continuing to get brainwashed by this stuff. So, he really had a major impact. And I guess it was, what's Trump's younger son's name?
Barron?
Barron Trump?
So between Bobby and Barron Trump's social media revolution, that was a big key. So no, I think there was there were a lot of people who in LA, for example, did either not turn out for Kamala, or did switch and vote for Trump. There were a lot of minorities, black men in particular, and Latino men that turned out for Trump. California is so skewed, so it's hard to see here. But look at the swing states that she didn't win. In Ohio and Pennsylvania, and these places, those definitely tell you much more of a story than LA might.
I lived in LA for like 27 years, not only the city, but the LA area, some of it in the city of Los Angeles. So, and Ryan lived there for a while too. So we're somewhat familiar with some of the politicians there now. I'm wondering who you're running against, and if I may remember any of them. Who are you up against? Who's your competition?
Well, this district is amazing. I mean, this was Edward Roybal's district, who was the first Latino congressman elected in California. 1962, I think, that election. So he came in during the Kennedy years, and he served all the way to 1993. His daughter, Roybal Allard, served as well in that district and then another district. So the second congressman after Roybal left was Javier Becerra. So Becerra got elected in 1993 in a special election, and served until he got a cabinet. He became the Attorney General of California. Then he became a cabinet member under Biden. And then now it's Jimmy Gomez. So what you had with Roybal was from Boyle Heights. He was from here, and he had a story like mine, where multi-generation in the Southwest. His family was in New Mexico, like mine was, going back hundreds of years. He helped build a lot of things in East LA, Boyle Heights. Becerra is obviously a well-educated man, but he's from Sacramento, went to Stanford, is not from here, became part of the Democratic Party organization, was put in there. And similarly with Jimmy Gomez, who a lot of people will say he's a bit of a step down in a number of ways from even Becerra's level, but Jimmy Gomez grew up in Riverside. He's not from here. So I'm fifth generation in this part of LA. Boyle Heights, Lincoln Heights, some of the oldest parts of LA, and some of the most devastated. We have the highest the highest percentage of renters. 78% are renters in this district. We have Skid Row is in my district, all of it, the proper definition of Skid Row, but so is City Hall, so is Alvera Street and Union Station. It used to be that a lot of the people that were here when I was a kid worked in the auto industry, some of which was in the Valley. There was a Bethlehem Steel Company right outside my district that laid off 2,000 people in the early 80s.
Wait, you're for steel? Isn't that bad for the country?
Right. Yeah, it's better that China builds our skyscrapers and bridges than we do. So no, there's a lot of issues like that here, and
well, homelessness, of course, is one of the biggest issues. That's one of the reasons I left. I want to say this the right way. I left. Not so much because there are a lot of homeless people, but because my fellow Californians at the time didn't seem to have any sense of urgency about it.
Right.
Didn't seem to have an attitude, well, this isn't right. We can't tolerate this. There was no attitude like that. So I felt like, well, it's never going to get better. If it's nice to have empathy, but you've got to have some kind of very aggressive approach to it. And I know this is one of your big issues, but I think you need a certain mindset from the community, not just, a politician to have this. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's why I'm running for federal office, because I think the local situation has totally failed. And it's actually a lie to call it, not that you're saying this, but the general idea is that LA has a homeless problem. We do, but it's actually where the national problem is focused, because we only have 10% of the population in the state of California, but we have like 30% of the homeless problem. And
it's a nice place to be homeless if you have to be homeless, because the weather is mild and they provide a lot of services for the homeless.
Yeah. No, I believe there has to be I'll give you another point on this. When I said earlier, was brought up Republican, Democrat, Independent, what's been going on. I ran for office in 2022 as a Republican, and I gave a speech in Orange County to a Republican audience as a candidate for U.S. Senate. And the biggest applause line I got was when I said, I'm for a new civilian conservation corps and WPA type project to solve the homeless crisis. And the crowd went crazy of Republicans, So
Mhm.
you need that kind of New Deal approach. So you have massive underemployment and unemployment in this district. South of my district is South LA, massive unemployment and underemployment. Going back to the days of the 92 riots, the Watts riots, it's been there for generations. Put folks to work, especially young men, rebuilding the community, cleaning the situation up. So, for example, Sheriff Villanueva, who left office in, not in the best shape, but he had a program of going down to Venice, where they had a big homeless problem, and saying to these guys, look, what's your name? Do you have family? They had a clipboard with 10 or 12 questions. And the last question was, you're not going to be able to stay here. So where are you going to go? We have housing for you. We have the hospital, or, you would check and see what they needed. You got to see what people need. I think we need more resources, essentially take a couple of law enforcement people, but about 25 civilian conservation corps type folks with about 3 or 4 medics with them, because almost
Right.
all these people need medical attention right away.
Right.
I
would need
remember the
medical
sheriff.
attention being on
The
street for
sheriff
a
did
week.
that, but that's a good example of what I mean about the mindset, because that was controversial. It's almost like a turf war. There was resentment that
Mhm.
he chose to exercise his authority there, as opposed to leaving it to LAPD. Am I right?
There's a lot of divide and conquer nonsense that goes on here. So that happened again with the ICE situation here, where the Democratic local officials were posturing and saying Trump is out of control, sending in the National Guard. I would say, well, wait a minute. Okay, I understand certain excesses are happening. Marines I wouldn't have sent in, but the National Guard, if they didn't have to come in, why was the federal building getting vandalized? You know,
Mm.
who was stopping that? The LAPD or the sheriff? And who was stopping them from doing it if they were supposed to do it? So yes, you created a condition where they did come in. They weren't, and the National Guard hasn't been killing people here or anything like that. It's so extreme. And really, what you have is I actually heard that a city official recently said that LA is one of the only places he's ever seen that is chartered to not function properly. So
Why
so
is
you
that?
actually,
Why is
What does
that?
that
I think what you have with the council districts, they have a city council system, which used to be at large. Now it's districts, right? And I think a lot of these are just sort of fiefdoms. The district that I live in, the city council district is different than the congressional, but the city council district goes further into downtown. You might have heard of the graffiti towers here, that are 3 empty towers that were built and are only
Yes.
half built. Have you heard about these, Morgan?
Oh,
Yes, I've
wow.
seen the video, and
You've
it's
seen the
like
videos?
stunning. Yes,
Yeah, they got
Really?
tagged
Like
Yeah.
big
big towers, and they're just filled with graffiti.
40 stories high of half-built luxury apartments, 3 of them, right across the street, literally on the same street as Staples Center or Crypto.com Center, where the Lakers play, and where the World Cup is going to have some, and the Olympics are going to have events. So a Chinese company built these, or started building them, and gave cash to the city council member, who's now sitting in jail. This guy had cash in the drywall in his house.
Oh, wow.
He had, and he tried to run his wife for the seat when he was facing trial. So completely disgraceful. A best example of trying to run his council district as a fiefdom.
So let me ask you, Rob, would you say that you want to make California great again?
Maca, yeah, or Mala, yeah,
Make
Mala isn't
LA.
good. Yeah.
Well, there is one other aspect which I wanted to bring in, because we have an international audience. People pay attention to a lot of things, and there's been a lot of fights with
It's not a
Massey.
big audience, by the way, but it's international. There's like 5 guys in
in the
It's
basement in
somehow.
Bulgaria.
What?
I know those
I'm
guys.
kidding. I'm kidding. It's big. It's independent.
Yeah, we have a great audience. No, and people are very much interested in the war dangers. They see the debates with Trump wants to primary Massey, the spending, Doge, war. So one of our regulars, Pirate Smurf on X, he said, "Are you going to take AIPAC money, or are you going to be a real American politician?"
Yeah, I won't. So in this district, that's actually what made the difference. In 2022, the Democratic Socialist candidate, this is a district that's 70% Latino, and the Democratic Socialist ran an openly gay Korean American Democratic Socialist against Jimmy Gomez, and he almost won by only 1,500 votes. That was in the midterm 2022. So in the last midterm, the last election 2024, Jimmy Gomez, who was his big tagline was "I don't take PAC money." For years he was saying that, and then AIPAC was the reason he won in 2024. He won by 10 points, so that made the difference. And no,
What about instead of lying to the electorate, what about lying to AIPAC? Has anybody tried that? Make them think they'll do their bidding and then not do it after they take the money. Would that get them killed, or would just
that did happen to Jimmy in a way? He actually told them, he was their guy, and then he voted against Netanyahu in a vote, and they didn't like that too much. But typical,
so
right?
Did anything happen? Did they like put a hit out on him? I mean, what can they do? Seriously, I've always, this might be a naive question, but I've always wondered, like, well, what if you don't do what the people who donate money to you? What's going to happen?
Honestly,
I guess they could turn their money against your competitors and do that sort of thing. But
I know they do that, and I know that Cory Bush, was it Cory Bush?
Booker.
No, the one who got voted out. Is that?
Oh,
that sounds familiar.
Name right?
But, yeah, I think so.
She said that AIPAC constantly came to her, trying to recruit her, and she was just like, "No, this is where I stand. They want them to have rights and a statehood." But then they said, "Well, what we're going to ask you is just to be quiet on this issue, or we are going to make your freshman year like a living hell." And I guess that's just because they will take out ads. They have enough money to do that.
Well, that's the whole thing. That's the whole point of Massey. And now Elon Musk is saying that he's going to finance a new political party. And so there's all sorts of talk about.
Right, but if you don't play that game with them, and if you don't deceive AIPAC, they're not going to give money to you anyway. They're going to support your opponents anyway. I don't know. Maybe it's a bad strategy to rely on tricking AIPAC in order to fund.
I guess there's like a little more revenge, that they have a little more teeth in the game when you sideswipe them.
There were two big reasons they put money into this district. One was they want to keep Jimmy in as a safe vote with the Democratic majority that goes with them. There's not a big Jewish community in my district. There used to be in the Boyle Heights area decades ago. But the other reason is that the Democratic Socialists are very pro-Palestinian and very much end the occupation. Israel doesn't really have a right to exist kind of attitude, right? So there's definitely an extreme there. But I would tell the Israelis that, look, or any Israeli lobbyist that came to me, look, I'm certainly for peace in Israel, or for Israel to exist, and I think they have a right to exist as a nation state. But there needs to be a long-term peace for the region that brings justice, especially economic justice, to everybody involved. There has to be peace. I'm running as the de-escalation candidate in this area, whether it's internationally or locally, escalated tensions. And anybody doesn't like that, then they got to find somebody else to buy.
Well, the tide is turning. I don't know if I can find it while we're talking, but a poll just came out. And I forget exactly how it was worded, but it was to the effect of like what percentage of Democrat voters now oppose Israel as opposed to previously identifying as supporters of Israel. And there's been a dramatic shift. So yeah, I'm going to try to find that while we're talking.
Well, I mean, there is a you see the fight in both parties. People talking about MAGA being split on these questions. So you also were talking about, I was thinking about while you were talking on infrastructure and things like this, you have the high-speed rail program in California, which has devoured, $20+ billion, and have they built a foot yet of that?
No, there is parts of it that are built, and it's labeled as a boondoggle. Sorry, some landscapers just arrived. I don't think they're
no,
mine,
we don't hear them.
Okay, and then my pug is going nuts. Mochi, come here.
Oh, Jesus, I thought you meant something else.
So, you asked. Wait,
just the rail, the high-speed rail.
Well, couple things on my website. There's a tab that says articles. People can go there and read a really good article. A very good defense that was in the LA Times of high-speed rail. because we need high-speed rail. We absolutely need it. We need it on a grander scale than the California high-speed rail system. Just the fact that China is building, tens of thousands of miles of high-speed rail, and we're doing nothing. Even if you broke it down regionally, Acela is decades behind what is being built in China. I was in Singapore a few years ago on a consulting job, and their subway systems are amazing compared to ours. Spain has high-speed rail, so there's nations that are supposedly behind us on all the categories we talk about, and they're way ahead of us on rail. So, no, this is another reason why we need federal involvement at the highest level, because it isn't the case that we need fiat money, hyperinflation, right? However, we already have that with massive speculation, all the things that have gone on for years and decades now. What we can do is put money into infrastructure like high-speed rail and other regional rail systems that would put thousands, if not tens of thousands of people to work in productive jobs. People say one of the things they talk about in the article is, well, this is a rail in the middle of nowhere. Well, that's where you want to build rail. You want to actually connect two parts of somewhere through the middle of nowhere and have more development along that rail.
That's
I was actually
Interesting. Yeah.
I was actually born in the Central Valley in Madera. My parents are from LA, but they ran away from home to have a kid when they were runaway teenagers, and that was me. Route 99, it was the source of all these little towns being built up in Central California. That and the state water project. So those are infrastructure projects that are big, that then create the conditions for you to sustain more people. So I'm definitely big on these projects.
Okay, last question from me, Rob. What about something I've heard debated among more MAGA people? End the Fed.
Yeah, I'm definitely a banking reform candidate. So there's a lot in between what we have now and ending the Fed. The Federal Reserve was reformed in the 1930s by Mariner Eccles, who was a Republican. Very interesting case to look into. But I want to be one of the banking reform members and work with the public banking movement that's out there, that's on the left. And then there's a movement on the right around Orrin Cass and the American Compass for American system style banking reform. Lincoln's National Bank, the Hamilton National Bank. So there's a whole space there.
Now I know there's something about you I like, other than that you drink wine.
Yes, I'll drink to that.
Well, also you're an outsider, Rob, and I'm wondering if you might see an opportunity to kind of thread the needle here. What I mean is, on one hand, you were distinguishing yourself from the other Democrats who are like socialists or whatever. But on the other hand, people seem to be going for outsiders now. Yeah. So look at Trump. He's like the ultimate capitalist, and he got elected. Zoran the Magnificent in New York rejects capitalism. It's completely two different types of people in one sense, but on the other hand, they're both outsiders. Can you be both an outsider in that vein, but also somebody who doesn't reject capitalism?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I've been for most of my adult life. In 1992, my first election, I voted for Ross Perot, and then I worked in independent politics for a long time. In 2008, I was actually an official staff member of the California Democratic Party, working with Barbara Boxer's staff and under the state chair, Art Torres. No, Mochi. Sorry. My howling dog.
He's a good name.
Yeah.
He's a... But no, and I'll say one other thing. If you don't know, California has an open primary, so the top two vote getters go against each other in November. So in this district, it's almost always two Democrats. So I'm hoping it'll be Jimmy and myself, most likely. Would be crazy if both of us beat Jimmy, and I'm running against the DSA. But I think anything is possible right now, Jeff, for sure.
Right. Well, certainly you have the wine vote. We are real, what do you call them, power brokers? What's the word for people who can like make somebody
kingmakers.
That's right. Last week we had Jose Vega on. He's running for Congress in New York. His district is the Bronx. This week so who knows? Maybe all our people will be in Congress, and when we go to Washington, we'll have friends there.
Yeah. Yes. And Rob, are you shooting off fireworks for 4th of July? Because apparently some parts of California are not allowed to.
Oh, really?
I think, no, it's actually legal in LA, the city of LA. I live in the city limits of LA.
Right.
It's illegal here. But I think that warehouse that just blew up in Northern California of a bunch of
Yeah,
fireworks, I think that's enough for
right.
me.
Yeah.
My favorite 4th of July is I spent a 4th of July in your home state, Ryan, of Arizona. I was in Sedona on a 4th of July.
Oh, yeah.
Not a peep. That was my favorite.
That's great.
I'll
Awesome.
tell you a way to see a great fireworks display in your area. I discovered that. I don't know if it'll work if you do it on purpose, because I discovered it by mistake. I was in downtown LA. My last few years, I lived in Long Beach, and one
Yeah.
4th of
Oh, yeah.
July, and
Mhm.
one 4th of July, I was downtown, and I drove home to Long Beach on the 710 as all these fireworks displays, like just people doing it, not cities doing it. Everywhere I looked, to the left, to the right as I drove, it was a fantastic display of amateur fireworks. I don't know if it'll work if you do it on purpose, though. It was an accident.
Well, we have a bunch of hills here too. We go up to the hills and just look down, and
You can see the whole area. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess
All
my
right.
cool anecdotal or story from has a cool experience on 4th of July is I was flying in to North Carolina, and so I just saw all these fireworks going off in different
Oh,
places.
that would be great too.
It was really, really cool.
welcoming you home. That's great.
Yeah.
Where I live, the fireworks are more like war zone because the HOA says no fireworks are allowed. And so everybody goes out and buys 5 times the fireworks. And you just can't see through the cloud of explosives going off. So,
Yeah.
all right, Rob, thank you very much. You're welcome to stay on with us.
Yeah,
Here's
love
your
to
website
hang out.
again, Lucero for Congress, and people can go there to learn more about your campaign and donate money. And as long as you're not working for AIPAC, and you're welcome to join us here. Our next guest, Richard Freeman, is a researcher for EIR magazine, the Executive Intelligence Review. And he's aware of another friend of ours, Scott Ritter, who has been leading a fight to make nuclear disarmament a main topic. There he is with Bobby Kennedy. And that relationship right there really made the question of nuclear war and ending the danger of nuclear war a main topic of the Trump administration campaign for presidency. So now what you have, though, is those who control NATO are pushing more and more for a clash with Russia that could become nuclear, maybe even with China. Richard, welcome to the show. It was said by the British First Baron Lord Lionel Pug Ismay that the purpose of NATO was to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. Something that comes to my mind is that the USSR lost 27 million people in World War II. So did we and do we need NATO?
No, we haven't needed NATO. We didn't need NATO when the Warsaw Pact dissolved, but we haven't needed NATO in any real sense because its inception was not what people think it is. And what I wanted to mention, because I spoke with Ryan, and good evening to everyone here, is an operation called Operation Unthinkable. And Pug Ismay figures into this very prominently. He was one of 4 people working under Churchill who put this together. I would just say that the world right now is beset by wars. Anybody who thinks that this is going to go away and simply dissolve is, I don't think, well informed. We had the United States on 22nd of June dropping 14 30,000-pound bunker busters on Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites. This would have brought us to a nuclear war. It was the intention of that. It was the intention of Israel to bring us to that position. Didn't happen, fortunately. We have, of course, in Ukraine, any point, this coalition of the willing, so-called, led by Keir Starmer of Britain, Friedrich Merz of Germany, who want to have a NATO proxy war in Ukraine grow. They are also putting together a massive military buildup. And of course, you have in Taiwan and China, there are people who are trying to rev up a war there by constantly arming Taiwan and urging it to declare independence. All 3 of these examples have 2 things that I've just mentioned, have 2 things in common. One, despite their different locations and places, they believe in endless war, permanent war that keeps escalating for the purpose of escalating. And second, the use of nuclear weapons. And what I'd like to just give, and as an outline, we can discuss it further. And there are enough nuclear weapons in the world. There's 16,000 that can be deployed within 12 hours notice. And the minute that about 5 of them go up, everything else is going to go up because nobody's going to wait for the nuclear weapons to drop on their heads. That is a fundamental question. Where did this policy of nuclear war combined with permanent wars come together? And I would say that this comes together in this thing called Operation Unthinkable, which I'm going to show in a second, at least some of it. This precedes the RAND Corporation. It precedes Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld. It precedes 1957 Operation Drop Shot, which was the plan for the United States to use a nuclear bomb. The key person here is Bertrand Russell, is Winston Churchill. And I will just say that he is a beast man. Now, that may seem very strong to some people.
And how nice that you're talking about the British on the eve of Independence Day.
Isn't that funny? Yes, because, yes, it has, and you're absolutely correct, Brian. He was a supporter of Mussolini, was a supporter of Francisco Franco. He was praising Adolf Hitler until September of 1937. Remember, the Anschluss taking over Austria by the Nazis was only in March of 1938. But the key thing, and he was the head of one of the leaders, not the head, of the British Eugenics Society. He said that was his aim in life, to purify the race. But one of the key things that I think I will just identify is 2 things. He was a supporter, director, and so-called savior of the British Empire. And the British Empire, over 5 centuries, killed hundreds of millions of people. It was the biggest genocidal institution that has ever existed. And the second thing is he wanted to destroy Russia. He hated the United States, hated Roosevelt. You can read all the stories that say opposite. That's just not the case. So what I would like to then show is where this comes from, where these policies come from, and how we can get rid of these policies to move to a new development and security architecture, which gets rid of this, hopefully, forever. So if we could have the first slide. These got out of order, so I'm only going to show a couple of them. This is the policy paper called Operation Unthinkable. And if your viewers can see, written in hand, in this paper, it says, Russia, threat to Western civilization. This is the way the British oligarchy, Churchill, and others thought. I have a picture I don't know it will succeed in. Churchill was born in Blenheim Castle, which is the Duke of Marlborough's castle. We can go through that. Next, please. What were the tenets? This was pulled together, proposed by Churchill in April of 1945. So we're still fighting World War II. And the Soviets army at that time, Russia, the Soviet army, is liberating Hungary. It's liberating Auschwitz. It's liberating Poland. And it was moving to liberate Germany from Nazi occupation.
Now, hold on a second. I've had a number of people on X, and of course, they're all experts on X, tell me that they weren't really liberating. They were occupying.
Yeah, that's Churchill's. It is Churchill's statement, Ryan. Look, the British didn't fight this war very much. They had, of course, the bombing of Britain, the Battle of Britain. They fought a little bit in in Africa. They had most of their troops stationed in the Middle East, in the Far East, and so on. Of all German soldiers who died, and I don't mean to play this up as a good thing, but just so people can get a sense of this, because it has to do with something that you and Jeff also said earlier. 70% died at the hands of the Russians. They fought. The United States supported them through Lend-Lease, and the United States came in. The British did not fight. So when, after they fought, the British thought, and the purpose of this war, and we can go into this in the question and answer period or discussion period, was not what people think it was. It was put together by Lord Montagu Norman and Jean Marchak, who put Hitler into power. It was for Russia and Germany to destroy each other. And it's stated openly by certain people that was the purpose. Mm-hmm. When after Stalingrad and then, of course, Leningrad, the war started to reverse and the Red Army started moving to liberate countries. The British couldn't stop it because they weren't even mostly in the vicinity. They weren't planning to be in the vicinity. So they said, oh, it was all done to occupy. No, it was to end fascism, which was generally fought mostly by the Russians and the Americans. So I would just say the people who tell you this as experts.
I was being facetious. They were definitely not experts.
I know that. I know.
Can I add, Richie, to what you're saying, that when Bobby Kennedy ran for president last year, he gave this peace speech referencing the speech by his uncle, President Kennedy, who pointed this out to the American people in June of 1963, right? That it was the Russians who lost all these people in the war.
And if you think, Rob, about the age of Kennedy, right? Kennedy was a soldier. We all know that. We all know about his being blown up in the PT book. He knew, many people who lived through that war did know what was actually going on. Now, no, you're right. On unthinkable, just to put it on the table, if we could have the first slide.
This one?
The one before, which shows the report. That's
Sure. Let me get that here. Hold on.
I think
almost there. I got this one here, right?
Yes. Now you can't read this, so we could call it an Operation Unreadable. But this is what happened. Is it was proposed in April by Churchill. He set up a 4-person staff to do this. The only people in the world, America was not informed. The British government was not informed. The only people that were informed were 4 people who were members of the British Joint Chiefs of Staff, of whom Mr. Ismay was one, and a few planners in the British government. So this I got from the archives of the National Archives of Britain. So what I did, so you know, next slides you're going to see are not written in this form so that people can read them, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible. So this is what they state as the objective of Operation Unthinkable, which is for a total surprise preemptive strike against the Russian forces in Germany, drive them back across Poland, and invade Russia until Russia is conquered and divided and dismembered. If it sounds familiar to the NATO cry that we are going to win a decisive battle against Russia, meaning defeating it, that's where this comes from. So I'm just going to take a couple of these, as I mentioned to Ryan. The first one, they say at the very beginning, object. And you can see in the bold, the overall or political object is to impose upon Russia the will of the United States and the British Empire. A quick success might induce the Russians to submit to our will, at least for the time being, but it might not. That is for the Russians to decide. If they want total war, they are in a position to have it. Now, let me just mention again, this was part of the thinking of British brains and American brawn. The Americans didn't know about this plan. So they're saying, we are going to bring America in behind this plan. Second slide on this, please. So point 3, a previous one, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
Okay, so the only way in which we can achieve our objective, this is point number 3 for those watching, with certainty and lasting results is by a victory in a total war. Now, it's explained in the report. The total war will engulf, it will be several years, they say. It will engulf Asia. It will involve Japan. It will escalate all around the globe. This is where the permanent war, just take permanent war or endless war, and you have where this doctrine comes from. And again, I'm just highlighting the main points. And point 4, please. That would be the next slide. Apart from the chances of revolution in the USSR, that means they would overthrow Russia's government of Stalin, just as they want to overthrow Putin, not the same people at all, nor do they have the same outlooks as such. And the political collapse, aside from this, on which we are not competent to express an opinion, the elimination of Russia could only be achieved as a result of the occupation of areas of metropolitan Russia with a war-making capacity. So they were going to occupy all of Russia. This is Churchill, before World War II has ended. VE Day is May 8th or 9th, depending on whether you're in the United States or in Russia.
Right.
Now, the last thing I just want to throw on the table, and then we can go into different features of this, is 2 things. One, I want to take up your point, but we didn't get the slides. We had a little bit of question of ordering.
Yeah.
Churchill decided, he was informed of the Operation Trinity. That's where the nuclear bomb was exploded on the Alamogordo White Sands in 1945 on July 16th. This is, people have seen this stuff if they don't know it in the Oppenheimer movie and stuff like that. Churchill is informed, that's July 16th, by July 18th. By July 23rd, Churchill marches into the office of the head of the British Army at that point, which was Sir Alan Brooke, Brooke. And what he proposes.
By the way, we're going to put up your website, so I presume that people can go to schillerinstitute.com and get the fuller details.
Oh, absolutely.
All right.
I just want to read these two quotes.
Sure.
Furthermore, so he goes to the head of the British Chiefs of Staff, and this is what Churchill said, according to the diaries of Sir Alan Brooke. Furthermore, we now have something in our hands which would redress the balance with Russians. This is Churchill. Now we could say to Stalin, if you insist on doing this or that, we can just blot out Moscow, then Stalingrad, then Kiev, the Kuibyshev, Kharkov, Sebastopol, and now we're other Russians. And the second quote I would just put in, as Ryan said, you can get much more, it'll be posted. This comes from a statement that Churchill gave in 46, and he campaigned for this all throughout the 40s and early 50s. He even cornered the head of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Stiles Bridges, to get Truman to drop a bomb. But this is his second quote. He says, this is Lord Moran. Lord Moran was Churchill's physician. He was also his confidant. Churchill stated, this is from Lord Moran's diaries, we ought not wait until Russia is ready. I believe it be 8 years before she has these bombs. And this is Lord Moran. His face brightened. And this is Churchill. America knows that 52% of Russia's motor industry is in Moscow and could be wiped out by a single bomb. It might mean wiping out 3 million people. This is the policy.
Nice people.
Nice people. And I'll break off here. There's a lot more, but I would say, and this is something we're doing in the Schiller Institute and the LaRouche organization. I know you had Jose Vega on last week, who's a colleague of mine. We've got to get this and the collapsing financial system removed. There are ways of doing it, to build a new security and development architecture in which we orient to the global majority, which is 7 billion people. It's Africa, it's Asia, it's parts of Eurasia, it's China, it's Russia, it's India. This is where we can start to really develop. If America is wise, in the spirit of what we'll celebrate tomorrow, it would join. And we could have all the programs that Rob was talking about and far more, we could, so forth. That is the way you do. You have to bring what appear to be adversaries, like the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, to agree to common principles based on the concept of man as not as born evil, but as born good, with infinite perfectibility, and the development to develop the whole world.
Are there any particular adversaries that you see as being especially ripe for this kind of finding common ground that may not be obvious to folks?
Yeah, I could say something about that. We have a John Quincy Adams Brigade, the Schiller Institute, in Europe right now, and in Germany and France and elsewhere. The population there, Jeff, are very much like the population here. They do not like this policy. In Germany, it's a dictatorship. They're arresting journalists just like they are here, just as they are doing here. So you have a population which is misguided, and if they fall into populism, they don't know what they're doing. But if we educate them, I would say almost any major country in Europe, I would say, as strange as this may seem, given Friedrich Merz, who worked for BlackRock for several years, I would say Germany would be one place, and I would say the United States. But we have to get the war party out of control, And we
But are you
have
saying Germany and the U.S. are adversaries? Is that what you're
no,
saying?
no. I'm saying as adversaries of so-called Russia. Trump is moving. He had another 1 hour discussion with Putin today. He's moving away from this war policy, and it's flipping people out because they the NATO summit couldn't come up with a statement. We're going to pour billions and billions into Ukraine, and the reason was Trump. And I say it only in Germany because the population there, as in other places in Europe, are not only fed up with it, but if the Russians are forced to launch nuclear weapons, the head of all of these planning for NATO is in Wiesbaden, Germany, and other places like Berghausen. And they know it. And they're insane if they sacrifice themselves on the altar of pushing a nuclear war, which is the British are still pushing for today.
Interesting. Very interesting. Morgan, what are your thoughts?
Oh, well, I just want to thank you, Richard Freeman. This was such an excellent presentation, and I would encourage everyone to watch the full length one or
Oh
get
yeah,
all
we
the
can post
information.
that.
Yes. I guess I just have a particular question. Given the halt on weapons to Ukraine and then this supposed ceasefire with Israel and Gaza, a lot of strategists are saying that it's just because the U.S. is out of weapons that they've taken this new stance. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, two things. I think with Ukraine, Morgan, look, this is a policy. Trump is trying to do it very carefully because remember, they tried to railroad him on Russiagate and Christopher Steele dossier and Robert Mueller and that whole apparatus, which was to prevent the United States and Russia, who have a historical basis. John Quincy Adams, when he was very, very young, was dispatched to Russia. He was in Russia. He became one of our first ambassadors to Russia. There's a whole history. But the thing is, I think Trump is being careful, but he realizes, and Ukraine has no chance of winning. And the people who support, I believe, Ukraine at this point are not supporting him for that. They're not supporting Ukraine for that. They're supporting because they want to go to a nuclear war. Their financial system is crashing. And the only way that they think they will have power is to intimidate the world. It's a very dangerous, it's a very stupid policy. But who would say that we have an ally in Russia and call for the nuclear bombing of Russia on July 24th as of 1945, as Churchill did? So there's a certain degree of madness. In Ukraine, in Israel, I don't know. Look, this thing with Iran was insane because Iran is a civilization. They have problems, but they're a real country. They have real people, and they were betrayed by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy, who put out a report and then later said, oops, we didn't necessarily mean it, but justified the basis for this bombing. So that is still a danger. I think Trump and Putin, they did discuss it today, and they're trying to calm it down. The question with Hamas is, what will Israel accept? The key thing is that what Israel has done, you have this humanitarian, so-called Gaza Humanitarian Fund, which is a complete fraud in name. And people are told to go to 4 food distribution places in the south of Israel.
And they're getting bombed, right?
Ryan, they've been over, since just May 25th, over 550 have been killed. They walk to get a little 40-pound box of food, and over 500 have been killed. 4,000 have been destroyed. So my question I will only say to you to Morgan is, I don't know what Israel would do, and I don't know whether Trump is prepared to say enough of this to Netanyahu and so forth, and stop the neocons, if you want to call them that. I call them British agents who are pushing for a war like Lindsey Graham in the United States as well.
Now, let me just jump in here because that's a very interesting answer. Rob, of course, I think California, maybe even parts near LA, there is an Iranian population there. Any sense of how people think in your area about this?
Oh, there was real shock. I have a friend who's a documentary filmmaker who was born in Iran, and who he couldn't believe it, beside himself at a sense of betrayal, from the United States. Now, as Richard said, I mean, we're lucky there wasn't a nuclear exchange after that, because that kind of escalation is totally, literally playing with fire. So, as I said before, we need more de-escalation along the lines of what Richard is saying, one that's grounded in history. You know, the United States, Russia, and China are actually natural allies, and I would have that fight with anybody running for office. We have more in common with them over the last 250 years than we have with the British Empire. It benefits the tradition of the City of London and the British Empire for us to continue to act like them when we do, but that's not who we really are. And you know, tomorrow's 4th of July. Today's the last July 3rd, the last day of the Battle of Gettysburg. You know, it's worth thinking about what those men died for, and what Lincoln spoke about in his Gettysburg Address of what this nation represents. And I just hope we can all get back on that right track.
Yeah.
Rob,
And,
I was just saying, oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're
Go
fine.
ahead.
I just wanted, I guess, to propose
ahead.
another question to you. Our last guest on here, Mr. Steinbach, he proposed something where he said that the Israel is conducting blackmail with their nuclear arsenal with the United States. Do you think that plays here? Is there any legitimacy in your eyes to that claim, where Israel is kind of wielding their power with nuclear weapons to do what they have been doing?
Yeah, let me answer that. I just want to pick up on one thing on Rob.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
Morgan. Look, what should America be doing? America has the productive capacity is shutting down. We have lost 63,000 manufacturing plants that have been closed since 1998. They could be reopened. They could be retooled. Instead of the way we retooled them for World War II to build military equipment, what could we do? We could build nuclear power plants. We could build water systems. We could build hospitals in Africa and Asia and so forth. We can be building systems for food provision. We could be building tractors to be sent over there. We should be building high-speed rail there. And I totally agree. I worked a program with an engineer, Hal Cooper, for 42,000 miles of high-speed rail, including about 7,000 miles of that being magnetic levitation, which should be done. It would unleash the science. We could be bringing water from Alaska and Canada through the North American water power lines to bring down into the California, because one of the problems we have in the California fires is if you have a fire in Los Angeles or San Diego, the winds that come over from the Great Basin, which is the desert in Utah, they go over the mountains. As they come down, as they descend, they gain both aridity and they gain speed. And they take a little fire and they flame it into an inferno. That we have to address with national water projects. We should be building fusion. And the next level, we should be going to the moon. The Russians and the Chinese are going to develop this. We should be doing that. Instead, Trump acts 33% of the entire NASA program back to where it was in 1961 before John F. Kennedy started the moonshot. We have this contribution for ourselves. We have this contribution for the world. And if we work for the one humanity, if we see that other people are human beings and that they have creative minds, and that Africa will have 60% of its population under the age of 60, and that's under the age of 30, and that those are geniuses, and we start to open up that way, then we can transform America genuinely to something that could be done. And so I would just add on to what Rob is saying. As for the Israeli nuclear weapons, partly they exist because people want them to exist. The Israelis are particularly crazy, some of them, and they're genocidalists. I mean, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, Israel Katz, the head of the Israeli Defense Department, Netanyahu himself. But we need there, and I'll just say this, I know this is going to sound completely strange. We have called for it, the Schiller Institute, the Rush Organization, an Oasis plan. Bring water from the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, Dead Sea. Bring water from the south from the Red Sea there. Irrigate. Start building high-speed rail. Now, you might say, what's the chance of an Israeli or an Arab ever, or a Palestinian, ever working together? The point is, it can be done. It's the only lasting basis, because otherwise you'll end up signing peace treaties and they'll be gone in 2 years. It's only through cooperative economic development.
One thing Scott Ritter had said about that, because I remember that from some show not too long ago, he said the thing is you have to get governments to adopt that because it's a nice idea, but until governments adopt it, until it becomes not just in this venue here, but talked about on the floor of the United Nations, or Security Council or something like that, it's not going to go anywhere. So it seems to me, you said a number of things. It seems to me that with all of the various things going on with Trump, Elon Musk wants to go to space. He wants to go to moon, Mars, I guess, actually. There are other companies that want to do that, other countries that want to do that. Somehow we need to insert ourselves, and we have to make that a popular idea. And I do think that there's a big fight in the MAGA camp in particular, because that's what they voted for when they voted for Trump. They said no war, and that's what we want. So it seems to me that fight's going to have to get a lot bigger, don't you think? Jeff, do you think it's going to have to get bigger inside the MAGA camp to actually get these things back on the table that people voted for in the first place? That's what I think.
Well, like I said before, when we were talking about homelessness in Los Angeles, public opinion is a big deal. So, yeah.
Yeah, so many of these issues are so global. I know we're running out of time, but I was in Asia in early 2023 in a consulting work that I do. And, Manila has one of the largest homeless problems in the world. I was in Singapore, and Singapore is a place that was a backwater in 1965 when they were kicked out of, I think were they in Malaysia or Indonesia? Now I'm forgetting. So they're right there at the confluence of both those two countries, but they're an example of a nation that developed itself within a generation into a modern economy. And you could have the port of Gaza become the new port of Singapore. You could have, as Richard mentioned, the Oasis plan, but you could have shovels instead of rifles. That's really the plan, the spirit.
And I would just say one last thing that Ryan, or one thing, is that in answer to your question, there are $2 quadrillion of what are called derivatives, speculative bets. There's also this Bitcoin and stable coin, which is a total fraud. It's a way of taking away the sovereign currencies of any nation. This is going to collapse. There's nothing real beneath it. What's real is infrastructure. What's real is building power plants, building machine tools, increasing the cognitive ability of our labor force, which we're not doing. We're destroying its cognitive ability. But when that collapses, it's going to be a very big it's going to be a shock to everyone. It's going to be a shock to Trump. And so he may strut around and posture and puff out his chest and say, I've built the biggest, best economy in the world. But I think at that point, he may have to, particularly because there's going to be a lot of people and banking institutions that can go under, that are going to say, let us go in a different direction. And so therefore, it's not just that we're fighting this in an abstract setting, but that the financial system of the West, which has been built up as a speculative system, sucks wealth out of the developing sector and its own people and its industry. America's not the great country that's, everyone drives a Chevrolet, a Cadillac. It's just nonsense. The homelessness that Jeff keeps coming back to, which they estimated at 1 million, I estimate at 3 million. It's a product of the collapse. These individuals just are poor. And there's a doctrine that the poor don't deserve to live, which is embodied in the big, beautiful bill, so-called big, ugly bill. But I think that this is what, is going to be addressed. And it's as a speculative financial center in Wall Street or the City of London, or the development of mankind. I think people, when pushed to the wall, when their families' lives depend on it, may choose mankind. They may not be all in the right spirit at first, but they'll see that that's the best way out.
All right. Thank you very much, Richard.
Yes, thank you so much. And this was very timely for...
So Ryan mentioned the website. Is there any place else where people can see your work, Richard?
Yes, they can go to, it's called LaRouche Pub, LaRouchepub.com. And that's where we have the EIR magazine, and people can subscribe. We have a daily publication. We have a weekly publication. And then I would urge them to go to the Schiller Institute I think it's schillerinstitute.org or the LaRouche organization.org. And my stuff is there. Other people's stuff is there. And I will say one last thing. Tomorrow we're having what we have now will be about 108th International Peace Coalition meeting. We have them every Friday. I know that Ray McGovern's going to be on. Scott has been on several times and so forth. We've had Jewish activists who were for peace, who hate the government. We've had all sorts of different people from around the world. And so that's if they look at the International Peace Coalition. All of these things can be, I think, very effective if we, are committed to it.
All right. Well, Morgan, you were applauding Rob for not being apologetic about his Kennedy affiliation. Let's applaud Richard for not being apologetic about his LaRouche affiliation.
All right.
Yep.
The
And I just
crowd
wanna
is wild. They're
clarify,
going.
it is
Political.
thechillerinstitute.com. So just
Give it correctly, Morgan.
it's .com. So
.com.
yes.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. Political
And-
extremist is now a badge of honor when you get called these kinds of names.
There you go. All right. And Rob,
All right.
your website is roblucero.com, which coincidentally is your name.
Yeah.
And,
or Lucero
are-
for Congress. Both of them go to the same place.
All right. Are you on X? You got to be on X and make some noise
Yes.
there, baby. That's where all the
Yes.
action is.
I am, but it's small beginnings on social media, but we're gonna be taking off this summer. Morgan, any input you have on that, let me know. I take special advice. from
Be
those on
provocative.
30.
That's my advice. Start fights, be provocative,
Yeah,
shit talk. That seems to work
does
for
work.
everybody else.
All
And
right.
drink
Thanks,
good
you guys.
wine.
That's right.
There you go.
Happy 4th of July.
All
Happy
right,
4th
guys,
of
thank
July.
you.
All right. And those of you who are Ask the Inspector fans, we're on hiatus for the month of July. We'll be back in August, and the Whiners will continue on every Thursday night. So join us next week at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Thanks a lot, everybody. Good show. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Bye-bye.